Have you ever looked at an old photograph and felt that something inside it was wrong? Not the lighting, not the faces, but a quiet, unsettling detail that your eyes can't stop returning to. In the archives of the Newport Historical Society, one such photograph changed everything. A wedding portrait from 1905, elegant, perfect, radiant. The bride, Charlotte Vandermeer, daughter of a railroad magnate. The groom, a handsome gentleman named Charles Whitmore. Their smile spoke of promise of fortune, of love destined to last a lifetime, but under the magnifying glass of a modern historian. That photograph began to whisper a different story, one written not in ink or light, but in scars. What began as a symbol of high society's perfection unraveled into one of the most chilling deceptions of the Gilded Age, a man who wasn't who he claimed to be, and a bride who would never return home. Tonight, we'll open that photograph together and step quietly into a century-old mystery that still refuses to fade. Before we begin, where are you watching from tonight? And if this is your first time joining us here on Sleepy History Tales, remember to subscribe so you don't miss the stories that history tried to forget. In the quiet reading room of the Newport Historical Society, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights blended with the rustle of aging paper. Dr. Robert Hayes, a criminal historian known for his fascination with the secrets of America's Gilded Age, was carefully examining a set of old wedding photographs when he found one that would alter the course of his research, and perhaps his sleep. The image, dated June 15, 1905, seemed at first to be nothing more than a symbol of high society perfection. A moment of wealth, love, and legacy captured forever in sepia tones. It showed the wedding of Miss Charlotte Vandermeer, daughter of the powerful railroad magnate William Vandermeer, to a handsome newcomer named Mr. Charles Whitmore, a man whose reputation, manners, and appearance had charmed even the most skeptical families of Newport's elite. Charlotte looked radiant in her gown of white silk and fine beadwork, her expression open and trusting. Charles stood beside her, every inch the refined gentleman. Dark hair, perfectly combed morning coat, pressed to precision, confidence written across his face. He looked like a man born to belong among America's wealthiest families. The ceremony had taken place at the Vandermeer estate overlooking the Atlantic, followed by a lavish garden reception illuminated by hundreds of lanterns. Newspapers called it the most splendid wedding of the 1905 social season. But under the cold magnification of Dr. Hayes's lamp, the illusion began to crack. On the groom's left hand, resting gently at his bride's waist, was something faint, barely visible to the naked eye, a pattern of scars across the knuckles and back of the hand. They weren't the random marks of injury or accident. They were deliberate, symmetrical. And to Dr. Hayes, who had spent decades studying historical crime photographs, they looked disturbingly familiar. These were identification scars, marks often borne by criminals and gang enforcers of the early 1900s. Each line told a story of violence, of belonging to something darker than polite society would ever admit existed. And yet, here they were, hidden in plain sight on the hand of a man celebrated by the nation's elite. The photograph, intended to immortalize love and luxury, had instead preserved evidence of deception, the trace of a violent past woven into the image of gentility. What Dr. Hayes had uncovered was not just a forgotten wedding portrait. but what might be one of the most successful infiltrations in American criminal history, determined to understand who Charles Whitmore truly was. Dr. Hayes immersed himself in the glittering, exclusive world of Newport during the height of the Gilded Age, a place where money alone was never enough. To belong, one needed lineage, reputation, and generations of social polish. The Vandermeer family had held their place among Newport's inner circle since the 1870s, when William Vandermeer's railroad empire made him one of the wealthiest men in America. His estimated fortune of $50 million had bought not only an oceanfront palace, but also the kind of social status that made his daughter Charlotte one of the most sought-after brides in the country. The summer season of 1905 was particularly fierce and unspoken competition among the nation's richest families from New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, each vying to outshine the other through lavish parties, charitable galas, and strategic marriages. And amid that glittering battleground of wealth and reputation, a man with the scars of violence on his hands had managed to slip unnoticed into their ranks and win the heart of one of America's most privileged daughters. Who was Charles Whitmore truly? And how far could a man go to bury the truth of who he once was? If you're still with me, stay close. Because what Dr. Hayes discovered next will take us deep beneath the surface of Newport's golden age into the shadows that wealth was never meant to illuminate. In Newport society, reputation was everything. Families lived beneath the unspoken weight of expectation to maintain their standing, to marry advantageously, to keep the illusion of perfection unbroken. That pressure made them easy prey for men who understood how to wear a mask. Dr. Robert Hayes soon discovered that Charles Whitmore had stepped into this world during the summer of 1904, introducing himself as a recent Harvard graduate who had inherited lucrative mining interests in Colorado. His story was impeccable, his manners flawless, his conversation the kind that drew admiration from even the most discerning hosts. He quoted French poetry, effortlessly discussed European art with conviction, and spoke German and Italian as though born to privilege. Most persuasive of all, Charles presented himself as a man seeking love, not fortune. A declaration that appealed to families like the Vandermeers, who were tired of gold diggers disguised as suitors. The courtship followed every rule of propriety. Supervised outings, family dinners, formal visits conducted under watchful eyes. Charlotte was charmed, and her father, William Vandermeer, conducted what he believed to be thorough background checks, inquiries sent through telegraphs, and written correspondence that at the time were considered reliable. But the world of 1904 had no digital databases, no instant verification. A clever liar could weave a biography out of thin air, and if told with enough confidence, no one questioned it. To fool Newport's elite required intelligence, patience, and the kind of preparation only a seasoned deceiver would possess. Charles Whitmore, it seemed, had both. When Dr. Hayes brought the wedding photograph to Dr. Maria Santos, a forensic pathologist specializing in historical wound analysis, the mystery deepened further. Using enhanced digital scans, Dr. Santos examined the scars on Charles's left hand, each mark a piece of a silent confession. "These are not random injuries," she explained softly. "The marks across the knuckles are defensive wounds, the kind seen in someone who's fought repeatedly in close combat. But the deeper scars on the back of the hand, those are different, deliberate. They may have been self-inflicted or part of a ritual, perhaps even an identification system. Under magnification, 3 parallel lines were visible, carved cleanly, with a sharp blade healed long before the wedding day. Dr. Santos noted that similar markings appeared in 19th century criminal archives, especially among organized gangs operating in cities like New York, Chicago, and Boston. They weren't mere scars. They were signatures, identifiers of rank, loyalty, and fear. The combination of fighting scars and ritual marks suggested something chilling. Charles Whitmore had not only lived among criminals, he might have led them. Even more unsettling, he'd learned how to hide the evidence of violence so completely that even under the scrutiny of Newport's watchful eyes, no one had noticed. Dr. Hayes's research into early 20th century criminal practices revealed that the 3-line scar pattern was tied to several organizations infamous for murder-for-hire assassins who specialized in eliminating wealthy targets. The marks were both a badge of honor and a warning worn only by those who had killed and survived. If the evidence was right, then Charles Whitmore wasn't just a fraud seeking fortune. He was something far more dangerous, a professional killer who had stolen a dead man's name to infiltrate the very class he once preyed upon. The deception was masterful. Every piece of his identity had been constructed with surgical precision. When Dr. Hayes reached out to Harvard University, no records existed for any Charles Whitmore matching the man in the photograph. No diplomas, no enrollment, no correspondence. Even more telling, the supposed mining properties in Colorado were entirely fabricated. County records from Denver and surrounding towns showed no ownership, no business licenses, no tax filings. Every document Charles had once displayed, investment certificates, land titles, even personal letters had been forged. His knowledge of mining borrowed from research, not experience. The turning point came when Dr. Hayes stumbled across an eerie coincidence. In an old Boston newspaper dated June 1903, he found the obituary of a man named Charles Whitman, a real Harvard graduate heir to a family fortune and owner of extensive mining claims in Colorado. Whitman had reportedly died in a mine collapse. His body never recovered. Every piece of the false Whitmore's story, his education, inheritance, even the subtle details of his speech mirrored that of the real Charles Whitman. The imposter hadn't just fabricated an identity. He had stolen one piece by piece from a man presumed dead. Dr. Hayes realized the horrifying possibility. Either the imposter had found Whitman's death convenient and claimed his name, or he had ensured that Whitman never left that mine alive, and yet no remains were ever found. No one could prove that Whitman truly perished. That uncertainty had given the imposter the perfect disguise, a ghost of a man who could move freely among the living. As Dr. Hayes dug deeper, he found reports that made his hands tremble. Between 1897 and 1905, several wealthy women from New York, Boston, and Philadelphia had vanished under mysterious circumstances after meeting charming, well-connected suitors who fit Charles's description. Each case followed a hauntingly similar pattern. A whirlwind romance. A promise of marriage. Then, silence, the woman gone. Her fortune quietly transferred, her name erased from society columns as though she had never existed. Had Charles Whitmore, or whoever he truly was, been behind them all? Had he perfected a cycle of love, deception, and death that spanned years, even cities? Dr. Hayes stared again at the wedding photograph. Charlotte Vandermeer's delicate hand rested on her husband's arm. her eyes filled with trust. And beneath that same arm, the faint scars glimmered like ghostly writing. He couldn't help but wonder, did Charlotte ever see the marks for what they were? Or did she, like all of Newport, believe the mask until it was too late? If you were looking at that photograph, would you have noticed? The pattern was unmistakable. A charming, articulate man would drift into the upper circles of society, educated, well-dressed, fluent in all the right languages, and within months, a wealthy woman would fall under his spell. A sudden courtship, a swift marriage or engagement, and then both would vanish. Dr. Hayes traced the first known case to Boston, 1902. A widow named Mrs. Eleanor Ashworth, the grieving wife of a prominent banker, had met a man calling himself Charles Whitman. Their romance was a whirlwind. Dinners, opera nights, quiet carriage rides beneath the glow of gas lamps. 6 weeks after their wedding, both she and her fortune, nearly her entire estate, were gone. The newspapers of the time called it a scandal. The police called it a mystery. But the case was quietly closed with a convenient conclusion. The couple must have eloped to Europe. Her family disagreed. Eleanor Ashworth, they said, would never have left her children. She wasn't the type to run. Then came similar stories in New York and Philadelphia. Wealthy women, each introduced to a suitor with perfect credentials. A man educated at Harvard. A man with mining wealth in Colorado. A man whose details changed just enough to avoid suspicion, but never enough to break the pattern. Dr. Hayes began to see the truth that no one else had. These weren't isolated disappearances. They were a sequence calculated, rehearsed, perfected. Each new identity, a refinement of the last. Each victim a test that brought the imposter closer to his ultimate prize. And that prize was Charlotte Vandermeer. Hayes's notes described her marriage not as the beginning of a love story, but as the final act of a long, deliberate scheme. Charles had spent over a year preparing for his infiltration of the Vandermeer family. Bank records revealed that only weeks after meeting Charlotte, he had begun making casual inquiries into her trust fund, her inheritance, even the details of her family's estate management. He framed his curiosity as the concern of a man in love, a husband-to-be, wanting to understand his future wife's independence. In truth, every question had been strategic. By the spring of 1905, Charles had convinced William Vandermeer to restructure his daughter's inheritance, granting her direct access to a substantial portion of her fortune immediately upon marriage. A gesture of trust, the papers said. A father's way of proving faith in his son-in-law. But it was a trap carefully engineered to give Charles full legal control over Charlotte's wealth the moment their vows were spoken. Even the timing of the wedding had been chosen with precision. William Vandermeer would be traveling for business soon after leaving the young couple to honeymoon, alone at a private coastal cottage. Dr. Hayes would later call it an isolation by design. A quiet place. No witnesses. No interference. Within days of the wedding, Charles began moving funds, making quiet inquiries about jewelry dealers and selling off smaller assets under Charlotte's name. The transactions were fast too fast, as if each had been arranged long before the ceremony ever took place. Then came the discovery that chilled Hayes to the core. Passenger manifests from New York Harbor showed reservations made under false names, booked for passage to South America on a ship scheduled to depart just days after the couple vanished. At the time, South America was one of the few destinations where US extradition laws held little power. The elegant wedding portrait, the one Dr. Hayes had first found in the archive, captured the exact moment the trap was complete. Charlotte's face glowed with happiness. Charles's smile, however, seemed too still, too controlled, a mask fixed for the camera, concealing the quiet satisfaction of a plan fulfilled. 3 weeks later, they were gone. Servants arriving at the Vandermeer honeymoon cottage found chaos. Furniture overturned, drawers emptied, Charlotte's letters half burned in the fireplace. It wasn't the home of a happy newlywed couple. It was the aftermath of panic and violence. Most haunting were the stains, dark patches on the carpet half scrubbed away. The patterns of spatter told a grim story, not a single act, but a prolonged struggle. Blood in the hallway, near the dressing table, even by the back door. Charlotte's jewelry, worth over $100,000, a fortune in 1905, was missing. And yet, scattered through the garden, were fragments of it, a bracelet broken in two, a diamond brooch torn from its clasp. It was as if Charles had taken only what could be sold quickly, leaving behind the sentimental pieces he had no use for. The Vandermeer family was devastated. The police searched the shoreline for weeks, but no bodies were ever found. Newport society, unwilling to face scandal, buried the story beneath silence. But Dr. Hayes couldn't look away. He returned again and again to that photograph, the image of Charlotte, resting her hand gently on her husband's arm, unaware that the man beside her might have already chosen the date of her death. And somewhere across the decades, her smile still seemed to ask, did anyone ever see what was coming? Would you have hidden among Charles Whitmore's personal effects, folded neatly beside his shirts and travel coat, was the first real evidence that shattered the illusion of a gentleman. Investigators found maps of South American ports prepared under false names. There were multiple passports, each bearing a different identity. And in a small envelope, a series of letters communications with known criminal associates in Boston and New York, casually referencing the Newport job. It was clear then. Charles Whitmore was not who he claimed to be. William Vandermeer, desperate to uncover what had become of his daughter, refused to rely on the local police. He hired private investigators from Boston and New York men familiar with this kind of deceit. Their findings came quickly and brutally. Charles Whitmore's entire background had been fabricated. His supposed Harvard education, his mining ventures, his lineage, all inventions of a careful, practiced liar. And there were other disappearances. Women who had met men just like him, who had vanished just as suddenly. Charlotte's inheritance had been transferred to several New York and Boston accounts just days before she vanished. The documents bore her signature, but they trembled unnaturally, like the handwriting of a hand forced. The money was withdrawn in cash and never seen again. Despite exhaustive searches of the Newport coastline, no bodies were ever found. The disappearance of Charlotte and her husband became one of the most sensational mysteries of the early 20th century, a story that rippled through America's wealthiest families. For the first time, the gated world of privilege and gentility realized it was not immune to monsters. Detective Inspector Thomas Brady of the New York Police Department had been following a similar trail for years. Wealthy widows, missing brides, vanished fortunes. The Whitmore case, he would later say, was the key that unlocked them all. Through patient cross-referencing of police files from multiple cities, Brady exposed the true identity of the man the world had known as Charles Whitmore. His real name was Michael Sullivan, a former member of the Hudson River Gang, one of the most feared criminal syndicates of 1890s New York. Sullivan had once been wanted for 5 confirmed murders. He had disappeared from the city after a violent gang war, reinventing himself not as a fugitive but as a gentleman. The 3 thin scars across his left hand, which Dr. Hayes had first noticed in the photograph, were now confirmed to be marks of rank within the Hudson River Gang. Each line represented a killing completed for the organization, a badge of death hidden in plain sight at the heart of polite society. Detective Brady's findings were horrifying. Between 1898 and 1905, Sullivan had assumed at least 7 distinct identities, infiltrating upper-class circles from Boston to Philadelphia. His pattern never changed: identify a lonely or recently widowed woman of means, gain her trust, marry or engage her, drain her accounts, then erase all trace of her existence. His victims' families, unwilling to believe foul play could occur in their world, had dismissed the signs as heartbreak or scandal or elopement. But Michael Sullivan had not fled for love. He had fled with money and blood on his hands. Hidden compartments in his New York apartment revealed what police described as a ledger of ghosts. Inside were photographs, small tokens taken from victims, rings, gloves, hairpins, and notes on their bank accounts. He catalogued his crimes as though they were business transactions. The revelation of Sullivan's true identity ignited one of the largest manhunts in American history. Police from 6 states joined forces with federal agents. It was one of the earliest investigations in which the newly formed Bureau of Investigation, what we now know as the FBI, played a role. Sullivan's crimes, which crossed state lines and involved forged federal documents, forced the government to develop new systems for tracking criminals who moved between jurisdictions. And yet, for all the modern machinery of justice, Michael Sullivan was never caught. He had prepared too well. With at least 5 alternate identities, forged passports, and a network of loyal associates in major ports, he vanished like mist. Rumors placed him in New York, then Boston, then a ship bound for Argentina. None were ever confirmed. For William Vandermeer, the search never ended. He spent the rest of his life and much of his fortune hunting the man who had stolen his daughter. Some said his investigators eventually traced Sullivan to Buenos Aires, living under a new name, charming new victims. But with no extradition treaty, there was nothing the family or the law could do. The photograph that began Dr. Hayes' investigation, the wedding portrait of Charlotte and her husband, became more than an artifact. It was evidence and a warning. The joyful expression on Charlotte's face, frozen in time, became a haunting symbol of trust betrayed. And those faint scars on her husband's hand, overlooked by society's eye, revealed what polite society refused to see, that evil often dresses itself in refinement. Over the decades, the image has been used to train detectives and private security experts. Modern forensic tools have enhanced the photograph, confirming details the human eye could once only guess at. Facial recognition has linked Sullivan to at least 3 other unsolved murders from the same period. Today, that portrait remains preserved in the Newport Historical Society, its glass faintly reflecting the faces of those who dare to study it too long. It serves as a quiet monument to deception loss and the danger of appearances. And sometimes, When visitors look closely at the photograph, at that faint curve of the groom's smile, or the tension in his hand, they say it feels almost alive, as though Michael Sullivan is still watching and waiting for someone new to believe in him. So tell me, if you found an old wedding portrait in your attic, would you look closely enough to see what's really hidden there?